Okay, we're going to have another lesson here. Give me a second to get on screen. And this video is a little different. I'm going to be able to pause it at some points, and we'll see. I think I'll pause it. But at any rate, this lesson is about sandpaper, different types of sandpaper, what they're used for. And as is true with most anything in life, there's 1,000 different philosophies, I guess, for sandpaper, woodworking, how to do something. Everyone has their own little shortcuts and tricks they use, and this is going to be my understanding and what works for me. So if somebody gives you another idea, it doesn't mean Mr. D's wrong. It just means it's a different idea. That's you know, that's what makes the world go around. That's what makes the world interesting. Sometimes we get stuck on our little pet little philosophies and thought patterns, and think that we kind of get stuck in what's the pre-operational stage of development as adults. We're not just children. We get stuck in this where we have a difficult time seeing other people's viewpoints. And if we ever learn to get past that, it makes the world a more beautiful place, more interesting. You get to learn more and blah, blah, blah. I don't want to take too much time on that, so let's get down to it. Sandpaper can be used for, let me get this real quick. Can be used for more than just sanding wood. You can use it for sharpening chisels. This was kind of spontaneous, so let me get I'll show you my little sharpening. My little sharpening board I made for chiseling, all with different size grits. If it's sort of chipped up and needs intense work, you start at 60 grit. I have it numbered up here. And this is just general. You could use 80 grit to start, 150, 100, but to go on to the next level. But if it's really intense, you're going to start 80 or 60, the lowest grit, 120, 220, 400, 1500, or 2000. And that's the way I like to do it. This isn't a chisel sharpening lesson, but just to point out that you can sharpen chisels with sandpaper, and a lot of people do that. Once they're sharpened, you can usually go about 220, 400, or 400, 1500, just to kind of touch it up a little bit. So sandpaper comes in different grits, and what it does, it removes some of the fibers of the wood. In some ways, I tell the children, some may disagree with this, but it's a lot like chiseling. When you're chiseling, I'll show you this real quick. You're just taking off slivers of, depending on how you're doing this, you're just taking off a little bit of wood. Well, speaking of sharpening, I think that one needs sharpened. But you're just taking off, if you can see that, I hope you can, just like the chisel takes off wood and shapes wood, you can shape wood with sandpaper. So they come in packages like this, different types of packages. And I don't have the one for that 80 grit package for that, but the way I like to generally, well, let me say this first. We call it sandpaper, but most modern sandpaper, it's not made of sand. And the thought just slipped my mind. What's on here? Some kind of like a synthetic material. I really don't remember, to be honest. I'm sorry, but it's not really sand. That's used to. That's the abrasive. Maybe the old days that would have been the case. This actually looks like sand, but when I post a video, I'll actually put the name of the material that's on most sandpaper today. But anyway, it's an abrasive material, and it's rated by different grits, and the grits are basically, the lower the number, the I guess for lack of better words, rougher, the more coarse the grit, and this is very almost like a cat tongue, or more coarse than a cat tongue. This is 80 grit. Let me put that up here so you can see. I think you can see that. That's 80 grit. And they come in different grits, like I said, and the lower the number, the more coarse the paper, the abrasive. So it goes from, I think the lowest I've ever seen is 40 grit. In the shop, the highest we have is 2000 grit. And this is wet dry sandpaper. It's used in the automotive industry a lot before they prime and paint the wood, or the steel. So you have these different grits. The highest I've ever seen, I think, personally, they could go higher, is 8,000 grit. And like I said, that the grit has to do with the coarseness or how fine it is. Like this 2000 grit just feels, compared to the 80 grit, it's comparing it to rocks to glass, I guess. It might be a good illustration. So the idea is, and again, some people would disagree with the way I do things. That's all right. I have my own way of doing it. It works for me. A lot of times, especially with handwork, when I come to the sanding stage of our work, I'll start with 80 grit. And the reason why, especially working with the children, is because since their work is very rough to begin with. Let me grab this piece of wood. You know, I learned woodworking by using all power tools. So with power tools, for instance, this night light project, I would have done this with either a router, probably a router, yeah. It would have been a smoother finish, faster. That's how I would have done that. Same with this was just a kind of I use this for a demonstration of doing chisel work. But if you can imagine some of the work looking like this from chiseling, it'd be a little bit smoother. What I like to do is use 80 grit, start with 80 grit, because it's going to take off more of the fibers of the wood. It's going to take off more material in a faster amount of time. If you try to sand this with say 2000 grit or 400 grit, it would get the job done, but it would just take much longer, because you can imagine the difference between using rocks compared to glass. I mean, so the way I like to do it, maybe I'll use this for a demonstration. I don't know if this will work totally, especially since that's really rough, but maybe I can give you an idea of what I'm talking about in terms of how much material 80 grit can take off. I'll just I don't know if you can see this, but it takes off a lot of material. It's sawdust. and you can tell it's just a little bit smoother. So that was just a few minutes. That's just not even a few minutes. That's what, 30 seconds. Right here, it's much smoother compared to right here. And actually, I would smooth that out with a chisel as much as I could first. But I just want to give you an idea how I like to do some sanding. It takes off more material, so you spend less time with finish sanding. And so I like to start with 80 grit, then I'll move up to 150 grit, and then I'll go to oh, I don't have it here. Well, there is 150, 100, 120, 150. This package has 60, 80, 100, 120 grit. So then I like to go to, somewhere in the 100, then the 220, and this is 400, and then I finish with 1500 or 2000. And I do that whether I'm chiseling, doing lathe work, mainly lathe work, what we do here in chiseling. So I do that regardless. And I also will do it, let's see, like on Cheetah's work. Now she put a finish on this polyurethane. It's beautiful. I mean, it's absolutely gorgeous. She's a little more advanced woodworker. She did that by herself on the lathe, mahogany wood. But I don't know if you can see this, but some of the finish, and this is a little typical, but some of the finish, the wood soaked in the finish less in some spots than others, and she might have gotten too much. Looks like too much finish right here. So what we'll do when I'm getting sawdust off. What we'll do when she comes in is we'll take 1500 or 2000 grit, lightly sand this, and you can also use here it is. You can also use steel wool, as long as it's steel wool is rated by what they call aught, by zeros. You want to get 404 aught steel wool. You could actually take steel wool and clean your those drip pans in your oven, if you still have an oven like that. You can clean chrome, not scratch it. You have to be kind of careful, but you could. It's pretty amazing. I used to use it in my cleaning business. That's how I know that. And so anyway, you can use a steel wool as long as that's 4/0. You can use 400, might be a little too aggressive. I would go more with 1000, 1500, 2000, and just lightly sand that, and then put another coat of polyurethane on it, and that's going to look beautiful. So I think that's about it for that. Other than the way you recognize grits, it's going to say on the package 150 grit. Like this one has 3 different size grits. Here's 220, 400. Yeah, 400. But if you don't have the package, another way to figure out which grit you're using is on the back of the sandpaper. They have these numbers. It's going to say P220. In this case, it just says number 60. I don't know if you can see that. In this case, it says P220 right there. I'm stretching to show you this. So that's another way you can tell what grit of sandpaper you're using. These sheets, usually what we do, we either cut them. This is what I like to do, and we make sanding blocks. We'll wrap up. This is sort of a big one, but we use this for obviously it just gives you more leverage. Basically, that's all it's for. It gives you're able to hold this sand instead of holding it like with your fingers and thumb and folding it up. And it's flexible, and it's just more difficult to use like that. If you put it on a sanding block, wrap it around a piece of wood, and staple it, then it gives you much more leverage. You can push harder. I think this is 220 grit. And that already took some of the material off. You can also, they have sanding sponges, and I don't know what grit this is, probably 150. Got this at the dollar store. It's great. Works pretty good. There's another one more expensive to get into little corners and contours. Let's see if you can see that. That one is 220. It says on the edge of it, it's 220. There's some other grits of sandpaper sponges, but if you don't have a wood block, you can, and you happen to have you can actually take a sponge also, any sponge. This one's stiffer, so it's actually better to use these, but take a sandpaper sponge and wrap it around that, and you can have the same effect. This is 80 grit. Took off a lot of material right there in a short amount of time. So now, when you're finishing, let me see if I want to make sure I didn't forget anything. You can use the sandpaper that way with the sponges. You can also shape it. You can also wrap it around a dowel. This was kind of a failed project. You actually need a spray adhesive to wrap this around and put on here. We tried to do it. We didn't have any, so we tried to do it with staples and duct tape. Didn't work. As soon as we put this in the drill, it fell apart. So, but you can actually, originally this was just like the sanding block. It was wrapped around a round dowel, and it's obviously for working on, is it concave? Material. So you can do it like that. Maybe we'll make one of these and buy some spray adhesive and show you how it works. But if you have a concave, let me try to find one here. I don't think we have anything like that. Well, you could use it like this, put it inside here, and I hope you can see that. Can't do it that number. It gives you more leverage. That's all it is. You could do it like this with just the sandpaper, but it's a little more difficult. You just get more leverage like this. Makes your job easier. It goes a little faster. You can also, one of the 8th graders made this last semester. This was one of their projects, and it's very useful. It came in very handy for sanding legs or sanding dowels like the, whoops, almost fell over here. I need the camera just a little bit closer. Let's see if I can get some of this this dye off of here. But it's obviously for round objects, round legs. And let's try it. Let's see. Well, if you can see, it's dropping blue flakes down on that piece of wood, and voila. There you go. It just makes it, like I said, it's all about leverage. Makes your job a whole lot easier when you're sanding. What else? I think that's about it for here. If you want to take a lot of material off, if it's really rough, Start with the 80 or 60. If it's not really rough material, it's like this surface here, you can start with 100, 220, finish it with 400. I like to use, and I'm going to go through it very quickly. Well, here's an example. As you can see that size fairly rough. So what I'm going to do, if we have time, I don't want to make this too long. It's already been 20 minutes. I will start with this, with the sanding sponge. It's 80 grit. If you have rough material like this, I'm going to do one little spot. And I'm going to go through this real quickly. Or what I'll do, I'll start with 80. I'll go through the different, what is this? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different grits. I'm going to pause the video and I'll sand this section, just a little half of this, and then you can see the before and after product. So just give me a second, I'll pause this and get right back to you guys in a little while. If I can figure out where to pause it at. I cannot see where to, oh, there it is, okay. Okay, I'm out of breath. I thought I'd bring you back in on this last part. I went through all the different grits, 80, 150, 220, it's over in the box, then 400, and then 2000. I did it once. I went through all the grits, and this section of the wood was pretty much, it was still rough. And if you remember, this part actually had, if you rewind the video, this section right here actually had a stamp on it. So the sanding actually removed the paint and quite a bit of material. So, but I went through it again through the 80 grit, all the way to 400, and I brought you back in so you can see what I did. I'm going to use the 2000 grit, and so you can see how I did this. It took me maybe, well, the first pass was maybe 5 minutes, but I did it twice, so it's about 10 minutes to do all this, and that has something on it, so I don't like that. Well, let me do this. Do it this way. I want to make sure the part that I'm using is clean. There we go. If it has, like, I use this for some of the chisel work, so when you're using sandpaper on metal, it actually removes some of the metal and it will be black. And when you put it on wood, it actually transfers the metal particles to the wood. So this is a 2000 grit, and I want to show you this real quick. Number one, you can see all the sand dust, so sawdust that it removed. You can also see up here it's fairly rough still. I can't tell if you can see this or not, but and right here it's really smooth. And if you notice, there's a big difference between the grain. I hope you can see this, but there's a big difference between the grain on this section of the wood compared to this. This is very rough. Let me do it this way, maybe you can get an idea. That bottom section is very rough. The top section is very smooth. Basically with the 400, you actually start burnishing the grain. And some people don't like that. I personally like it. Especially if I'm going to use just paste wax to finish it. It just makes the grain, makes it look beautiful, in my opinion. So we're going to do this 2000 grit, wrap it around the sponge like I was telling you. You should see the grain, or which are the lines, start to shine and become more pronounced And you do have to use a little bit of effort when you're doing this by hand. If it took me 10 minutes, I'm assuming with the children it could take them a half hour or longer, because I might be old, but I still think I have a little bit more strength than some of the children. Now, some of the children that have seen this, and they feel the wood, they all say it's just so satisfying. And it is. It feels, I don't know, it's like a calming effect just to feel that. It's kind of like a woodworking version of a fidget spinner. Now you can see that knot. I love the way it makes the grain pop out. It's shiny, burnished it. It's very smooth. But you can see with this knot and in some of the other cracks, little marks right there, it's whiter. It's a lighter color finish, like white. That's actually sawdust that got down into the crevices of the, ooh, I'm out of breath, of the knot. And you can see, I think you can see the sawdust particles on this wood. Because what you do, you go through all the different grits, use 80 grit, you wipe off the sawdust as best you can. Usually use tack cloth, but we don't have tack cloth. But I'll show you, even with the 2000 grit, there's still just a little bit of sawdust on there. So you take the sawdust off. That's very important when you get to your finish. And you do that for each level of sanding. Then you can use water, or since I have this available, I'll use the nail polish remover. Whoops. And you basically, you're cleaning the wood and getting the crevices as clean as possible. And I like to use this nail polish because it dries very quickly. You can use alcohol also, denatured alcohol, rubbing alcohol. It still has the same effect, and it evaporates very quickly. If I do this, you can see this is so rough it will rip up the paper towel. Let's see if I can show you. You can see paper towel particles compared to here. So, so there you go. Now, that's already dried out, and I didn't get it totally clean. You could actually use a soft toothbrush to get in there. I'm not going to do it because this video is already going long enough, but I want to show you just with paste wax. Just with some simple paste wax, what that's going to do to the finish. You know, the paper towel. And I'm going to go really fast. I'm going to talk fast because I don't get to do this in class, because obviously you can see this takes time to teach, and it's not fair to the children that I can't actually teach how to do this in class because we have so little time to begin with. I basically spend 5-10 minutes maybe at the tops, and they need to actually do the work. So here's some paste wax on the smooth section. Oops. Put a little more on there. I let it dry a little bit. Get another dry piece of towel. I don't know if it's dry enough, and I'm doing this very fast, so it may not be as pronounced as if you took your time, but we'll see if we can polish that just a little bit. It's not bad. I hope you can see the difference. especially where the knot's at. It just looks beautiful to me. So that's pretty much how you go through the different steps of sanding. That's how safe it is. You wouldn't want to leave it there very long. I only do it for like 10 seconds or